Coming up on the SBS on the Money podcast, rare earths stocks surge. Is the I sector starting to get a bit frothy? And are we seeing a stock rotation in specific sectors? All of that. Hi everyone, welcome to the SBS on the Money podcast for this Tuesday, the 14th of October 2025. It's a day where the Australian share market rose after being in the red for much of the day. The S&P ASX 200 up 0.19% to 8,899. Rare earth miners really doing much of the heavy lifting. The best performer on the ASX 200 today was Iluka Resources, up 16%. And on the All Ordinaries Index, it was Northern Minerals, up by 42%. And that's despite possible easing of China-US tensions. Last week, the US threatened 100% tariffs on China in retaliation for the nation's dramatically expanded rare earths export control. So rare earths are a group of 17 elements in the periodic table, most of them known as lanthanides. They're used for consumer electronics, electric vehicles, medical equipment, and robots, for example, and often relate to new technologies. And while there's a lot of them in the ground, they're dispersed, making them less viable to mine and often hard to refine. And overnight, in an interview, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said a meeting in South Korea with Presidents Trump and Xi was still on, helping investors' sentiment on Wall Street. So to tell us more about that and the rest of the day's market action, I spoke with Kai Chen, a head of investments at MPC Markets.
So we saw a little bit of rotation out of banks today. So the largest market cap stocks have seen a little bit of a fall. However, it's a tale of two sides where the resource stocks have actually performed very well. So BHP, Rio, some of the rare earth ones, as well as precious metals, they've all done incredibly well today.
Yeah, rare earths are interesting at the moment. We'll talk about that in detail in a moment. But what about the geopolitical story at the moment? Because there's a lot of global news about that, namely the developments in the Middle East we've seen overnight, and then the possible escalation in tariff tensions between the US and China. How are they playing a role in investor sentiment?
Absolutely. So on Friday night, we saw a bit of flare-up in tariff tensions again. So Trump threatened to place 100% more tariffs on Chinese imports by November 1st. So, we saw basically the NASDAQ and S&P 500 drop over the weekend, but that's really simmered down on Monday. So the market's really discounted in terms of how likely that tariff is to come into effect. And I think Trump himself has also downplayed that a little bit.
A lot of the tariff issues as well within China is China sort of like restricting exports of rare earths, right? We've seen a boom in rare earth stocks as a result lately. That's happened today, but it's not just a story of today. Lynas, for example, up around 230% since January the 1st. Arafura up around 250% in that time. Has the sector run up too hard, or do you think it's just getting started?
Absolutely. I think, of course, since the beginning of the year, rare earth has been so much in focus geopolitically. And, there is a critical choke point which China has in terms of supply on the supply side. So this is why we're seeing these producers really, go up in price quite a lot. And it makes sense because we want, basically the West wants to remove dependency on the Chinese supply chain. So all these rare earth producers locally, as well as in the US, have done spectacularly well. There's a fundamental reason behind that.
What do you make of the AI boom that has supported global stocks at the moment, especially as more of the top tech players continue to make deals with themselves? So, for example, last night, OpenAI agreed to buy customer chips from Broadcom, which is a $1.5 trillion US company.
Absolutely. So I think the AI thematic has been basically the largest opportunity over the last 2 years. And it's on a scale comparable to the internet revolution. So I think it really has a lot of societal impacts, and there's actually a lot of productivity gains that we see day to day. It's interesting with the acquisition, the proposed acquisition from OpenAI. They're the only frontier company which has a lack of infrastructure in terms of, like, if you compare it to, say, XAI or Google, they have their own compute infrastructure, which gives them an advantage. But OpenAI being the leading one out of it, they do have a good language model. However, they need the infrastructure to be able to deploy that at a cheap cost. So I think that's why they're making the move, and it's a smart move.
You mentioned the banks at the beginning of the interview. ANZ continues to outperform its peers today, though, and it followed its new strategy, which it unveiled yesterday. Can we go into more detail about what your take is about the sector? Is there a move, though, for investors overall to be pulling out of the banks and going into resources at the moment?
That's one of the ones that has come up quite a lot over the year. We saw in CBA the price increase over the year. And I do think the valuations are quite high. The Australian banks are pretty much the highest valuation across the globe. Not necessarily unjustified, but I do think that we are seeing a bit of a correction period. Now, ANZ has done well over the last couple of days because of their restructure. So basically, they're cutting down costs. They've done fairly well out of their Suncorp acquisition, and they are leveraging that, and they are stopping their share buyback. So I think investors are seeing that prudent action from ANZ as being positive, and that's why we're seeing them outperform.
Okay, and in wrapping up, what are you telling your clients right now, and where do you see the opportunities for investors?
We've been on three major thematics that have done really well, and it's likely to play out well in the midterm. So precious metal, gold and silver. As we saw last night, silver had about a 4% rally overnight. AI, of course, that's one of the core thematics, and as well as defense with the geopolitical turmoil that's going on.
That's Kai Chen there from MPC Markets, and he wraps the podcast for this Tuesday. Don't forget, if you enjoy it, to give it a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. To click that subscribe button and follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Business Ricardo, along with TikTok. And if you want to follow me on YouTube, you can get me at Ricardo Gonçalves. See you tomorrow. This SBS on the Money podcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be understood as constituting advice or a recommendation. It is not personal advice and it does not consider your personal circumstances or objectives. You should contact a licensed professional before making any financial decision.